It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started.
It's time for our Friday Agile, Not So Agile episode of the Daily Stand Up Podcast. And today, I want to talk to you about a quote that I heard. This quote comes from none other than Denzel Washington. Now, love him or hate him, the man is brilliant. And here's what he said. He said, "Dreams without goals are just dreams, and they ultimately fuel disappointment." And I thought about that. And I questioned myself, and I'm going to ask you the same question I asked myself. When I have a dream, do I put a goal behind it to help support that dream, to help me achieve the goal? And I remember I was hearing another motivational speaker, Steve Harvey, from Family Feud fame, and he was talking about how young black men are often presented with challenges. And when they're presented with a challenge, the way they behave or respond is interesting and different. He says many of those people feel like they're not given the same opportunity, and that's not necessarily true. He said when they're given the opportunity, how they behave and what they do is so different that many of them don't realize that they're being given the same exact opportunity. So let me explain. So a group of kids from all different walks of life, some wealthy, some not wealthy, some young, some older, some who are African American, Hispanic American, you name it. Every race, every creed, every culture was represented. Even some groups that were, not the typical fare. Everyone was equally represented. And they decided we're going to take this group on a hike. And they were hiking up the mountain, and they realized it was pretty steep. And one of the children noticed that some of the kids had these cool backpacks with water straws coming out of them. And one of the kids noticed that some of the kids had these really like larger backpacks with, big giant things attached to them, almost like a hiking backpack or a backpacking backpack. And some of the kids just had nothing but what they could carry. But they all were going for the same purpose, to see this beautiful view at the top of the mountain. And when they got to the top, one of the kids takes off his backpack and he starts building something. And the guy walks over to him and says, "Hey, what are you building?" He says, "I'm building a hang glider so I can get back down." And he assembles the hang glider and runs and jumps off the side of the mountain. You can see him soar through the air at the beautiful sunset and just soar all the way down to the ground further away. And it was just an amazing experience for that child. Another child, he gets this like outfit out of his bag, it looks like, and he starts putting it on. And you're quick to realize that it is a jumpsuit, and it's got, almost like a squirrel suit. It's got the wings underneath it, like a wingsuit. And, I walk up to him and said, "What are you going to do?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to jump off this mountain and soar so that I can experience life." And he runs and jumps. And sure enough, he's flying through the air. And it's amazing to see how incredible it looks when this beautiful guy with no paraglider or no hang glider is just jumping and doing his thing. Then another guy who was more tall and lanky, he pulls something out of his backpack and gets something set and puts on the backpack, secures it properly. And the guy walks up to him and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm securing my parachute so I can do a solid base jump." And he runs and does a base jump and jumps off the side of the cliff. The next kid goes up there and starts attaching a rope with different loops and does these things. And he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm prepared to rappel down and make it to the bottom and see all the beautiful things and waterfalls along the way." It was at that point that the one kid who had less realized that he didn't have a backpack with some type of way to get down. He didn't have all those things. So he questioned himself and said, "Why am I different? And why don't I have these things?" And he said at that moment his body was filled with fear because he knew that climbing back down would be nearly impossible on foot. And the gentleman who was there with him smiled at him and said, "Why don't you just jump?" He's like, "Jump and plummet to my death? Are you crazy?" He says, "Trust me." He says, "Why don't you just jump?" And the guy's like, "I can't do it. I don't have the tenacity. I'm not brave enough." He says, "I'm too scared." And finally, the guy jumps and soars over the edge of the cliff. And we don't exactly see what happens, but in the end, we know that he made it safely to the bottom. Steve Harvey describes this as people who often are the most scared, or people who are afraid to take risks, are the people who never discover that they have wings and that these wings are going to help them soar without the help of all those other things. Where every single other person needed assistance or help or a leg up or something to get to where they were going, the person with the least actually had the most. And I thought that was just a real good analogy and a real good story, because that could have ended way different with somebody plummeting to their death. But I listened to it and it reminded me of this quote that if you have dreams, which all these kids had dreams, they all wanted to see the same things. Some of them had a lot of planning and they had the tools and equipment and things necessary in order for them to be successful. And others had very little or no planning. And it didn't matter which side of the fence you were on. If you had the ability to set goals that tie to your dreams, you're not going to be fueled by disappointment, but you're going to be fueled by the ability to soar and the ability to see the world through a different set of eyes. So I guess what I'm trying to say is my message for today is don't worry so much about every single thing with regard to preparedness. It's good to have a good foundation and it's good to have some preparation. But even if you don't, dream of the way you could be successful, tie it all together with a goal, and let your body soar, let your mind soar, because you can do amazing things. I hope you have an incredible weekend. I hope this was inspirational for you. And until Monday, stay agile, my friends. We'll talk again soon. Do take care.